My name is Adele Marchetti, and I was 43 years old when my sister tried to take back the daughter she had handed me 18 years earlier. She got pregnant at 17. My parents went into a quiet, controlled panic. They said a baby would derail everything, that it would mark the family, that it would cost my sister Renata the future they had already mapped out for her down to the zip code. So they came to me. I was 25, unmarried, living in a rented half of a duplex, and I had never so much as changed a diaper in my life. I took the baby anyway. I raised her by myself. I worked a day job and a weekend job through her first 2 years, paid for her shoes at the thrift store and called them new, and sat alone at every single school event from the first finger painting showcase to the last awards night. My sister moved to Denver, finished her degree, built a career in pharmaceutical sales, married once and divorced once, and in 18 years, she never picked up the phone to ask a single question about her own child. And then my daughter graduated at the top of her class, and my sister walked into that auditorium in a white coat with a florist's box of roses and a card that read, "To my daughter, on the proudest day of my life." What happened that afternoon emptied my sister's seat, sent the man beside her walking out the side door, and brought 400 strangers to their feet for a woman not one of them had ever met. Before we begin, if you find yourself drawn to stories about family and about the quiet moments that decide who we really are, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. I read them. Now let me take you back 18 years to the phone call that came at 1 in the morning and reorganized the entire course of my life. I grew up in Hartwell, Ohio, a town of 9,000 people, the kind of place where the woman at the pharmacy counter knows whose marriage is in trouble before the couple does, and where the family name on the side of a building means more than the money in any account. My sister, Renata, is 5 years younger than me. She was the late, lovely surprise, the one our mother had stopped expecting, and from the moment she arrived, she was the center of every room she entered. She had a way of tilting her head when she smiled that made grown adults forgive her anything. I was the other daughter, the one who set the table and cleared it, who learned to do laundry at 9. Who walked Renata to her piano lessons every Wednesday because our mother said it would be good practice for the family I would surely have one day. I loved my sister. I want to be honest about that, because what comes later is easier to misunderstand if you forget it. I loved her the way an older sister loves a younger one, in that tangled way where exasperation and tenderness are wound so tightly around each other that you could never pull them apart. My mother, Lorraine, ran the household on a single unspoken principle. Renata was delicate. Renata had to be shielded. Renata was the one you stayed up worrying about. And I was the one who managed things, the steady one, the one nobody checked on because everyone simply assumed I would land on my feet, because I always had. My father, Walt, agreed with whatever my mother decided. He was not unkind. He was just absent in the way that some men are absent while sitting right there at the table, present for the meals, and gone from every conversation that ever mattered. I learned early that being capable was its own kind of punishment in our house. The reward for handling things was always more things to handle. I was 25 the spring it all changed. I had finished a nursing degree 2 years before and was working at a clinic in the next county, saving towards something I couldn't quite name yet. A house, maybe? A different life. Renata was 17, a junior, dating a boy named Cody who had a loud car and a part-time job at the tire shop. And then one night in April, my phone rang at 1 in the morning. It was my mother. I drove the half hour to Hartwell in the dark with my headlights cutting through fog. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table with both hands around a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking. My father stood by the back door with his arms folded, looking at a water stain on the ceiling as though it might rescue him. Renata was upstairs. I could hear her crying through the floorboards. My mother didn't look up when I sat down. She slid a folded paper across the table toward me. It was an ultrasound printout, nearly 5 months along. 5 months! Renata had known for almost 5 months and had told no one. Had hidden it under loose sweaters and the kind of silence that only fear can hold that long. And my mother's first words, before anything about Renata, before anything about the baby, before anything about Cody, who had already stopped answering my sister's calls, my mother's first words were, "We cannot let this get around town." I remember the kitchen clock. It read 16 minutes past 1. I remember the coffee going cold in the mug, and my father clearing his throat and saying nothing. The way he had cleared his throat and said nothing my entire life. My mother laid out the options like a woman planning a wedding she resented. Adoption, except that an agency meant forms, and forms meant a record, and a record meant people would eventually know. Keeping the baby, except that she would not have a pregnant teenager living under her roof for the neighborhood to count the months on. "It would undo everything we've built," she said, as though she had built something more substantial than a tidy lawn and a pew at the front of the church. And then she got up, went to the linen closet in the hall, and came back with something small and white, folded into a neat square. A christening gown. Cotton, yellowed slightly with age, the lace at the hem gone soft. "This was yours," she said, and she set it in my hands. I held it. It weighed almost nothing. It smelled like the cedar of that closet, and like time. My mother sat back down and looked at me directly for the first time since I had walked in, and she said, "You have to help her. You're her sister." The next morning, my mother made the shape of it clear. If I did not take the baby, she would call an adoption agency by the end of the week, and the child would go to strangers, and Renata would go back to school in the fall, and the family would never speak of any of it again. I asked the only question that seemed to matter. I asked what Renata wanted. My mother waved her hand, as though I'd asked whether it might rain. "Renata is a child," she said. "She doesn't know what she wants." My father nodded, because he always nodded. I went to the living room, where my sister was sitting on the couch with her knees drawn up to her chest, swallowed inside an enormous sweatshirt, her eyes ringed and swollen. She looked like exactly what she was, a frightened 17-year-old whose body and whose life had stopped belonging to her. I crouched down in front of her and I said, "Renata, tell me what you want." She looked at our mother in the doorway, and then at me, and then down at her own hands. "I just want it to be over," she whispered. "I want to go back to how it was." My mother pointed at me as though a verdict had been read. "There, you heard her. She has her whole life in front of her. She has school." She has school. I need you to hold on to that phrase, because I will hear it again. 18 years from now, on the strangest day of my life, those 2 words will come back to me in a crowded auditorium, and they will mean something entirely, devastatingly different. I drove home that night with the christening gown on the passenger seat beside me. I had not said yes, but I had not said no. And in my family, the absence of a refusal was always treated as consent. 2 weeks later, I called my mother and told her I would do it. I did not yet understand that I was not agreeing to a favor. I was agreeing to a daughter. She was born on the 9th of September at 12 minutes after 9 in the evening, 6 pounds and 11 ounces, with a swirl of dark hair and a cry that filled the whole wing of the hospital. I was in the delivery room. Renata was there, of course, because she was the one in labor, gripping the bed rail and breathing the way the nurse coached her. Brave in a way I have always given her credit for. A 17-year-old whose body was doing something enormous and ancient. My mother stood by the door with her arms crossed, watching the clock. My father waited in the corridor, no doubt studying a spot on the floor. When the baby came and was cleaned and swaddled, the nurse turned with her in her arms and asked the room, brightly, who wanted to hold her first. There were 3 of us standing there. Renata turned her face toward the window. My mother did not move. The nurse looked at me. I stepped forward and took her. 6 pounds and 11 ounces. Her eyes were shut, and her fist found my finger and closed around it, and she went quiet, just like that, as though she had simply been waiting for the right pair of arms. The nurse asked, gently, who would be taking her home. And there was a silence in that room that I can still feel in my chest if I let myself. I will, I said. I'm taking her home. I named her Iris. 4 days later, I carried her into my half of a duplex on Sycamore Street, with a second-hand crib a coworker had lent me, a case of formula, and the christening gown from my mother's closet, which I draped over her that first night, because I had nothing else that felt like a beginning. It barely covered her. But it was soft, and it had wrapped me once, and now it wrapped her. And for that one night, it felt like the whole world fit inside it. The first year very nearly finished me. Iris had reflux and a temper, and she screamed from late evening until somewhere past midnight, and I would walk the length of that little duplex with her against my shoulder, humming half-remembered songs, watching the numbers change on the microwave clock, and bargaining with a God I wasn't sure I believed in for 10 minutes of quiet. I was working full days at the clinic and coming home to a wailing infant. I learned to sleep in fragments, to eat standing at the counter, to shower in the 2 minutes Iris would tolerate the bouncer seat. One night, near 11, after 3 straight hours of crying, I stood in my kitchen in a formula-stained shirt and called my mother, and I was crying as hard as the baby. "Mom," I said, "please, I need help. One night, just one." My mother's voice was perfectly even. "You made this choice, Adele. You're a grown woman. You'll figure it out." And she hung up. Renata, that same fall, moved to Denver for college, her tuition assembled from scholarships and what my parents called their savings. The same savings, my mother told me, the following spring, simply could not stretch to cover a toddler's ear infections when I finally swallowed my pride and asked. In November, the county family court granted me legal guardianship. Renata signed the voluntary relinquishment forms and had them notarized at a shipping store near her dorm, and mailed them back in a flat envelope with no note inside. I put the papers in a small fireproof box that I kept on the floor of my closet, beside the christening gown, beside Iris's hospital bracelet, beside a photograph of her asleep on my chest at 5 days old, mouth open, one fist curled, finally, blessedly peaceful. She was mine, legally, completely, on paper and in fact. Let me give you the next several years the way I keep them, in pieces. Iris at 1, taking 4 wobbling steps from the coffee table to the couch with her arms thrown out like a tiny tightrope walker, and me catching it on a phone that could barely hold the clip. I still have that clip. Iris at 1.5, her first word, which was not mama or mommy, but simply D, her own private shortening of something, a name that was only ours. Iris at 3, when I started picking up clinic shifts that let me be home by afternoon, and a neighbor named Gloria, who had raised 5 of her own and possessed the patience of a stone, watched her for almost nothing because, she said, the baby was good company. Iris at 4, reading. Not letters, words. She read the back of the cereal box and asked me what fortified meant, and I had to think about how to answer her. Iris at 5, the first morning of kindergarten, marching through the school doors in a backpack covered in cartoon cats and never once looking back, while I sat in my parked car in the lot and cried for 20 minutes out of a feeling that had no single name. In all those years, no one from my family came. Not once. No birthday card, no Christmas package. My mother phoned now and then to ask, in a clipped, dutiful way, how I was managing. Never once to offer to help me manage. My father mailed a $40 check on Iris's 2nd birthday with nothing written on it, not even her name. The Christmas Iris was 3, it was just the 2 of us, and I wrapped her gifts in the colored comics from the Sunday paper because wrapping paper was an expense I couldn't justify. And she was so delighted by the cartoons on the outside that she almost forgot to open what was inside. When Iris was 6, my sister called. It was a weekday evening, and I was making soup. The Denver area code came up, and I nearly let it ring, assuming it was a sales call. "Adele, it's Renata." Her voice had changed. Lower, smoother. The voice of someone who'd learned in seminars how to sound like an adult. She did not ask about Iris. Not how she liked school, not whether she still woke in the night, not whether she'd grown out of the reflux that had defined her first year. She asked about a couch, a sectional she'd left in our parents' basement when she moved, and whether it was still there, because she was furnishing a new apartment and didn't want to buy one if she already owned one. I told her it was probably still in the basement. She said she'd ask Mom to arrange shipping. "Thanks, talk soon." 39 seconds. I timed it after I hung up because I could not make myself believe that had been the whole of it. That evening, my mother called. "Your sister's doing so well out there," she said. "Top of her program. Don't go making things complicated for her." "I'm making vegetable soup," I said. Renata graduated near the top of her class the next spring. My parents flew to Denver for it. They had the photograph framed, professionally matted, 20 inches across, and hung it over the mantel in the living room. Iris's kindergarten photo lived on my refrigerator, under a magnet shaped like a strawberry, and it was not anywhere in their house at all. When Iris was 8, 2 things happened in the same season that bent the line of my life. The first was that the regional hospital offered me a position as a charge nurse, more money than I had ever earned, with benefits and a schedule I could plan a child's life around. The second happened while I was rinsing dishes one evening. Iris was at the kitchen table behind me, working on a worksheet, and she said, to my back, "Dee, why don't I have a mom and a dad like the other kids?" My hands stopped under the water. A spoon slipped and rang against the basin. I turned off the tap and dried my hands and sat down across from her, and I said, "Iris, I love you more than anything in this whole world. Your birth mother loves you too, in the way that she's able to. But I'm the one who's here. I'm the one who's always going to be here." She studied my face with those serious, dark eyes that it always seemed to know more than 8 years should allow. "I know," she said. "I just want to call you Mom instead of Dee. Is that okay?" I had not cried in years. Not the night my mother hung up the phone. Not when Renata called about a couch and never asked her daughter's name. Not through any of the empty birthdays. But when an 8-year-old asked my permission to call me her mother, something in me simply gave way. She climbed down from her chair and came around the table and put her arms around my neck, small and fierce, and she smelled like pencils and apple juice. "It's okay, Mom," she said, trying it out the first time. That night, after she was asleep, I sat in the dark for a long while and thought about calling my mother, just to say, "Your granddaughter called me Mom today, and it was the best moment of my life, and also the saddest. And I need someone to tell me I'm doing this right." I didn't call. I already knew the answer. She would tell me not to confuse the child. She would tell me Renata was her real mother. She would tell me I was forgetting my place. Instead, I opened the fireproof box and I read the guardianship papers in the lamplight, my name on every line. And underneath them, I found the christening gown, soft and frayed at the hem now. And I held it until I could breathe again. I told Iris the entire truth when she was 13. We were on the back steps on a Sunday afternoon. She'd been circling the question for months, never asking it head-on. Why did Grandma Lorraine always introduce her as Renata's daughter? Why was there no baby photo of her in any family album? Why had she never met Cody? So I told her. All of it. In order. The way it happened. The phone call at 1 a.m. The ultrasound across the kitchen table. The christening gown and the drive home through the fog. I told her that Renata had been 17 and terrified and not ready. I told her about the papers, the notary near the dorm, the 18 years without a call or a card. I did not editorialize. I did not call Renata selfish or my mother cruel. I just laid out what had happened and let it sit there, plain. Iris listened without a single interruption. When I finished, she stood up, went inside, and closed her bedroom door. And she did not come out for the rest of that day, or much of the next. On the third morning, she came down dressed for school, sat at the table, ate a few bites of toast, and said, "I'm not mad at her." "At Renata?" I asked. "At any of them. I'm just sad for her. She missed all of it." And she picked up her backpack and went to catch the bus. And I sat at that table, holding a dish towel and not quite breathing for a long time. While I was raising Iris, my sister was assembling a life that looked very good from a distance. A graduate degree, a sales territory, a promotion to regional manager, a condo with a view, the kind of career that photographs beautifully. She married a man named Brent. I never met him. They divorced after 3 years. Each time something in Renata's life cracked, my mother would call me, never to ask how Iris was doing, never to tell me she'd heard Iris had made the honor roll again, but to instruct me not to add to my sister's stress. "Renata's having a hard time," she'd say. "She doesn't need to hear about anyone else's problems." I would point out that I hadn't spoken to Renata in years. "Good," my mother would say. "Leave her be. Let her get back on her feet." And year after year, September the 9th came and went, and the mailbox held nothing. No card, no call, no message. The post office knew where to find us. My sister simply chose not to send anything to the address. I finished a second degree in those years, a master's in nursing administration, 4 years of evening classes after full shifts. I graduated when Iris was 11. No one from my family came. A friend and colleague named Dana sat in the third row, and cheered as though she'd been hired to do it. I took a director's role at the hospital the following year. No one called to market. But I had stopped waiting for that particular phone call somewhere around the time Iris started losing baby teeth. The Thanksgiving Iris was 15 was the first time in years I'd brought her back to my parents' house. I'm still not sure why I agreed. Maybe I wanted her to have, just once, the long table, too many relatives kind of holiday. Maybe some stubborn part of me kept hoping the people I came from could surprise me. We drove the half hour to Hartwell, Iris in a button-down she'd chosen herself, so nervous she kept checking her collar in the visor mirror. The house was full. Cousins and an aunt and a neighbor couple, the table set for a dozen, turkey and the casseroles, a Thanksgiving out of a catalog. My mother met us at the door, hugged Iris briefly, the way you hug someone for a photograph, and then walked her into the dining room and introduced her to a cousin she'd never met. This is Renata's girl, Iris. Not my daughter, not our granddaughter, whom Adele has raised on her own for 15 years. Just Renata's girl. Under the table, Iris found my hand and squeezed it once. 15 years old, and she understood the architecture of that room more clearly than anyone seated in it. No one asked her about school, about the regional science competition she'd just placed in, about anything. After the pie, my mother cornered me by the sink. "It was good of you to bring him. Her," she said, loading plates. "Renata will be glad to hear she's thriving." "Then perhaps Renata should ask her herself," I said. My mother gave me the look I'd been receiving my whole life, the one that said I was being difficult again. We drove home in silence until Iris said, quietly, "I don't ever need to go back there, Mom." And we didn't. Iris's junior year was when I understood that she was not merely a good student, but something rarer. Straight A's, the hardest courses the school offered stacked one on top of another, captain of the debate team, a Saturday morning tutor for younger kids at the library. Her teachers stopped me in hallways to use words like exceptional, like remarkable, like, "Has anyone talked to you about scholarships?" I had considered nothing beyond getting her fed and her laundry done and her permission slip signed. The grades, the drive, the quiet discipline, all of that was hers alone. In October of her senior year, her counselor called me in. "Iris is going to be valedictorian," she said. "And her college essay is one of the finest I've read in 2 decades. I asked what it was about. She slid a printed copy across her desk. The title, centered at the top, read, "The Woman Who Stayed." I read it in my car in the school parking lot, because I knew I could not read it in front of another human being. She wrote about the night I brought her home from the hospital, about the christening gown, about learning to ride a bike in the duplex parking lot because we had no driveway, about the comics paper Christmases, about the night she'd asked to call me Mom, and I'd cried. She wrote near the end, "Anyone can become a mother by accident. Mine became one on purpose, every single morning for 18 years, and she never once asked to be thanked for it." I sat in that car until the lot had emptied and the light had gone gold and then gray, and I let myself feel every one of those years at once. 2 months before graduation, Iris came home one Wednesday and set her phone on the counter, screen up. "Mom, you need to read this." Someone had added her to a family group text by accident, almost certainly my mother, who could barely work the device. The thread ran back nearly 2 years. I scrolled through it at the kitchen table while Iris stood at the window with her arms folded, watching me. My mother, more than a year earlier. When Renata's ready, she'll bring Iris home.
Adele's just keeping her for now.
Renata, days later. Give me a little longer. I'm finally getting things stable. My father, a thumbs up. My aunt, poor Renata, after everything she's been through. An uncle, Adele should count herself lucky she got to raise a kid at all. I read it through twice. My hands were steady because they had to be. For 2 years, my family had been discussing the eventual return of my daughter the way you'd discuss reclaiming a casserole dish you'd lent out, as though I'd been holding her in storage. I set the phone down. Why didn't you show me this when you first saw it? Because I didn't want you to lose them, Iris said, even though they don't deserve you. 17 years old. Standing in my kitchen, protecting me from my own blood. I did not call my mother. I did not call Renata. I did not scream or weep or break anything. I went to the closet, opened the fireproof box, and read every page of the guardianship and relinquishment documents, every signature, every notary stamp. Then I closed the box and went back to the soup. If you have ever been the one the whole family leans on and never thanks, the dependable one who does the work while someone else takes the bow, then you know precisely the weather inside that kitchen. Subscribe and stay with me, because what my daughter chose to do at her graduation still stops my breath when I let myself remember it. 6 weeks before the ceremony, my mother called with news, the way you'd announce good fortune. Renata had met someone. His name was Preston. He was in commercial development, very successful, very conventional, and he wanted, my mother said, a real family. Renata had told him about Iris, about how complicated the family situation had been, about the difficult choice she'd been forced to make. Forced, I said. What was she forced to do?
You know what I mean,
My mother said. Forced to let you help. That was how my mother now described 18 years of solitary motherhood. Letting me help. Preston is very moved by it, she went on. He thinks Renata is brave. He'd like to meet Iris. This could be Renata's chance, Adele. Her chance to finally have the life she deserves. Her chance. Not Iris's chance to know the woman who'd given birth to her. Not the family's chance to heal. Renata's chance. The graduation of the daughter I had raised for 18 years, and my mother saw an opportunity for my sister. Does Preston know the whole story? I asked. He knows what he needs to know. Does he know she signed the papers at a shipping store near a college dorm? There was a silence. Then, don't you dare ruin this for her. I hung up and sat on the back steps and watched the streetlights come on, one and then another, until it was full dark. 3 weeks later, Iris came into the kitchen with her phone. She messaged me. She turned the screen toward me. An Instagram message from an account with a glossy headshot and several thousand followers. Hi, sweetheart. I know this is unexpected, but I'm your birth mom, and I've thought about you every day of your life. I would love to meet you. I'll be in town soon. 3 heart emojis, a sunflower. I read it twice and set down the red pen I'd been grading with. What do you want to do? I asked. I don't know. What should I do? That's yours to decide, Iris, not mine. She thought about it for 2 full minutes, and then she typed a reply. Short, even, cool. Hi, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate you thinking of me. No mom, no hearts, no, I'd love to meet you. Just an acknowledgement that a message had been received. Renata answered within a minute. Can't wait to see you at your graduation. I'm bringing someone special. Iris read it, then turned her phone face down on the table.
I thought about Renata at 17, signing a relinquishment form and mailing it back without a note. And Renata at 38, typing, I've thought about you every day, with 3 hearts. The same person, the same turning away, in a more polished font. She has school. I've thought about you every day. 2 sentences, 18 years apart. The first one, at least, had been true. The school made it official 6 weeks out. Iris Marchetti, valedictorian, class of 340. The call came from the principal's office while I was in the middle of a budget meeting, and I stepped into the corridor and listened to Principal Owens tell me my daughter had the highest grade point average in her class and would deliver the address, 5 to 7 minutes, her own choice of subject. That evening I told Iris, and she gave me the small, contained smile she had inherited from no one in our family, because it was entirely her own. I already started writing it, she said. Can I read it? You'll hear it, from the 3rd row.
For 6 weeks, I heard her behind her bedroom door, reading aloud, stopping, starting over. Long silences where I knew she was rewriting something. I bought my first new dress in years. Dana helped me choose it. Navy blue, plain, something I could sit in for 2 hours. Iris ironed her own shirt. She'd been ironing her own shirts since she was 14 because I'd taught her and she'd gotten better at it than I was. The call came 9 days before the ceremony, on a Thursday evening, my mother's number. I almost let it ring. Renata will be there, my mother said, no greeting. She's bringing Preston. They're flying in. Fine. Don't make a scene, Adele. I have never made a scene in my life. Good. This is an important day for your sister. I held the phone away from my ear and looked at it. An important day for Renata. Not for Iris, the one graduating. Not for me. For Renata, flying in with a new man to play the part of mother in front of an audience. She's bringing flowers, my mother added. Something nice, to make it special. How thoughtful, I said, because there was nothing else to say. I woke at 5:30 on graduation morning and couldn't sleep again. Iris's cap and gown hung on the back of a dining chair, the gold tassel catching the early light. I had pressed them 3 days earlier with a damp cloth between the iron and the fabric, the way my mother had taught me to iron when I was 10 years old, one of the few useful things she ever gave me. Iris came down at 7, showered, dressed in a white shirt and dark trousers. How do you feel? I asked. Hungry. I made eggs and toast, and we ate in the comfortable quiet of 2 people who had spent 18 years learning each other's silences. The morning sun hit the water glass on the table and threw a little band of color across the wood. Can I read the speech? I asked one last time. You'll hear it, she said. When I came back downstairs in my new dress, Iris was in the hall, adjusting her cap in the mirror, and I saw something small and pale in her hand, folded. The christening gown. The one from my mother's closet. The one that had wrapped me and then wrapped her, soft as tissue now, the lace nearly gone. She was tucking it into the inside pocket of her gown. She caught my eyes in the mirror. For luck, she said, and she smiled. I didn't ask anything more. I picked up my keys. The auditorium at the high school seats 400, and that morning every seat was filled. Folding chairs in the back, families with programs fanning themselves, the orchestra tuning in the corner. Dana and I found seats in the 3rd row on the left, close enough to see the podium,
close enough to see Iris when she crossed the stage. I smoothed my dress and folded my hands in my lap, and then the doors at the back opened, and my sister walked in as though she were arriving at a benefit gala. A cream-colored dress, auburn hair in soft waves, heels that announced her on the hardwood, a smile pitched to be read from the stage. Preston was beside her, gray suit, expensive watch, the bearing of a man who walks into rooms assuming they were arranged for him. Behind them came my parents, my mother in a blouse she saved for occasions and lipstick she wore twice a year, my father in a tie that didn't match his shirt. And in my sister's arms, a long white florist's box, and lying across the top of it, a card in a cream envelope, the flap tucked but the front turned outward so the table behind me could read it. To my daughter, on the proudest day of my life. 400 people in that room, families finding their seats, and my sister was carrying a box of roses and a card that claimed my daughter as her own proudest achievement. I did not move. Dana reached over and took my hand. Before the ceremony began, Renata made her approach. She crossed to the staging area where the graduates were lining up, and the parent volunteer at the rope did not stop her, because she smiled and said, "I'm Iris Marchetti's mother." And technically, biologically, that was not a lie. I watched her find Iris in the line and embrace her. A full performance of an embrace, both arms, head angled for the room. Iris stood with her arms at her sides. Then, Renata turned and came toward my row, heels clicking, and stopped at the end of it and leaned in close enough that the people behind us could hear. "Adele, I can't thank you enough for looking after her all these years. You've been an absolute godsend." She paused and rested a hand on my shoulder. "But I'm here now. I'll take it from here. 18 years, some 5,000 school lunches, 300 parent conferences, the nights I held a feverish toddler upright so she could breathe, the bicycle in the parking lot, the comics paper Christmases, the cakes I baked myself because a bakery cake cost what a week of groceries cost." I did not answer her. Not because I had nothing to say. I had 18 years of things to say. I did not answer because, across the room, I saw Iris watching us from the line of graduates, perfectly still, her jaw set, her eyes locked on mine. And in them, I read a message as clear as if she'd spoken it. Wait for me. So I waited. The ceremony began at 10. The principal welcomed the families, the orchestra played something stately, the superintendent spoke for 11 minutes about the future and the value of community, and used the word journey more times than I could count. Then, the graduates began to cross the stage, name after name. The handshake, the diploma, the photograph. Renata had moved to the second row, directly in front of me, her phone raised, filming. Each time a student crossed, she lowered it. My mother sat at the end of the row with the box of roses on her lap, guarding it. My father sat beside her, hands on his knees, staring straight ahead, silent, as he had been silent his entire life. And then, Marchetti, Iris. And everything else in that room fell away. The crowd, the heat, the roses, my sister's cream dress, Preston's watch, all of it dissolved. Iris crossed the stage, tall, steady, her cap exactly straight. She shook the superintendent's hand and took her diploma, and she looked down into the third row and found me. And she winked. And then she walked to the podium, because the valedictory address was next. and every person in that auditorium was about to learn who I really was. She adjusted the microphone, cleared her throat, and unfolded a page. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and carrying, exactly the way I taught her to project when she was 12 and terrified of a book report. "Graduates, families, teachers, thank you for being here." She began where they expected her to begin. The freshman year nerves, the cafeteria food, the substitute who showed films for a month. The room laughed. Renata laughed loudest, her hand on Preston's sleeve. Iris spoke about what the school had given her, the teachers who stayed late, the custodian who knew every student's name, the librarian who kept granola bars in a desk drawer for kids who came in hungry. She was warm and she was easy, and the whole room leaned toward her. And then she paused. She looked down at the page in her hands, studied it for a few long seconds, and then she folded it, carefully, deliberately, the way she had once folded a christening gown when she was 8 years old. And she set it on the podium and spoke without it. "I've been working on this speech for 6 weeks," she said. "I wrote 9 versions of it. But this morning I realized the most important thing I have to say isn't on any of those pages." The room went quiet, the particular hush of several hundred people sensing at the same instant that something unplanned is coming. Renata was still smiling. She leaned forward slightly, her phone recording, and I watched her straighten her shoulders, certain that her moment had arrived. She had no idea. "The person I most want to thank today," Iris said, "isn't a teacher or a coach or a friend. It's a woman who was 25 years old when somebody handed her a newborn and told her, 'This is your responsibility now.'" The auditorium was silent. She had never changed a diaper. She had never warmed a bottle. She had just started saving for a different kind of life. And she set all of it down, the next morning, without one word of complaint. She let it settle. She moved into half a duplex and figured it out. 4 hours of sleep a night for a year. She wrapped my Christmas presents in the comics from the newspaper because she couldn't afford anything else, and she made it feel like the most ordinary, joyful thing in the world. Somewhere behind me, a woman made a small sound, a mother somewhere recognizing the exact, bone-deep tiredness in those details. She went back to school when I was 11, evening classes 4 years after full shifts at the hospital. She earned a master's degree, and not one person from her family came to watch her walk. One friend sat in the 3rd row and cheered like a whole section. Dana's hand crushed mine. She came to every conference, every play, every awards night for 18 years. She never missed a single one. Renata was no longer smiling. Her phone was still raised, but her free hand had dropped to her lap, and she was looking up at the stage with an expression I had never seen on her face. Confusion sliding into recognition, sliding into something close to fear. Iris looked directly at me, 3rd row, left side. "She is not the woman who gave birth to me," she said. "But she is the woman who chose me, every single day for 18 years, and never once asked for anything back." Her voice did not waver. Her hands did not shake. She stood at that podium with the composure of someone who had learned composure from the most composed person she'd ever known. "Her name is Adele Marchetti. She is my mother." The room came apart. 400 people clapping, some rising to their feet, a few openly wiping their faces. Dana was crying without trying to hide it. The orchestra director in the corner pressed a program to her mouth.
Principal Owens, by the stage steps, put her hand over her heart. I could not move. I sat in my folding chair with my hands in my lap, exactly where they'd been for the last hour, except now they were shaking, and the tears were coming. And I let them. 2 rows ahead of me, Renata had stopped clapping. Her phone lay in her lap, still recording the lights overhead. Preston was looking at her, then at me, then up at the stage, then back at her, and something in his face was rearranging itself. My mother sat at the end of her row, the box of roses still across her knees, the card still turned outward where everyone around her could read it. To my daughter, on the proudest day of my life. Except that now, those words meant something entirely different. Because 400 people had just heard my daughter say her mother's name aloud. And it was not the name on the card. Iris looked at me from the stage and mouthed 2 words that no one else could see. Thank you. If you're still here, then you already understand this was never only a graduation story. It is a story about who earns the word mother. If you have ever held a family together when nobody was watching, this one is for you. Like it, subscribe, and stay with me, because what happened on the lawn afterward is the part I will never forget. The ceremony ended, and the families spilled out into the bright afternoon, onto the grass, graduates finding each other, cameras everywhere, the air smelling of cut lawn and somebody's cologne. I was standing near a maple at the edge of the parking lot when Renata found me, crossing the grass fast, her heels sinking into the soft ground, her composure cracking at the corners. Preston came behind her, his hands in his pockets, his mouth a thin, straight line. What was that? Her voice was sharp, loud enough that the cluster of parents nearby turned. What did you tell her to say? I didn't tell her anything. You coached her. You turned my own daughter against me. Iris appeared behind her, still in her cap and gown, diploma in one hand. Nobody coached me, she said, quietly, evenly, the voice of someone who has rehearsed a moment for years. I wrote that speech myself. Renata spun toward her. Sweetheart, I'm your mother. I carried you for 9 months. And then you signed a form at a shipping store and mailed it back without a note, Iris said. Grandma told me once that you had to leave because you had school. And you did go to school. For 18 years. You went to school, and to a career, and to a marriage, and to Denver. And that's all fine. But you don't get to walk into my graduation with roses and a card that says, proudest day of my life, and pretend those 18 years didn't happen. She looked at my mother, who had come up behind Renata, still holding the flowers. And Grandma? You told me on the phone that today was Renata's chance. But this is my graduation. It isn't her audition. Preston stepped forward. He had been silent through all of it, watching with the focused attention of a man who reads contracts for a living and has just spotted a clause that doesn't reconcile. Renata, he said, low and level. You told me the situation was complicated. You told me you were forced to give her up. Forced. That was your word. Renata wiped at her eyes. Preston, it was complicated. Did you sign away your parental rights voluntarily? I was 17. Did you sign voluntarily? The people around us had stopped pretending not to listen. Renata looked to my mother for rescue. My mother stepped in, reaching for Preston's arm. You don't understand our family. He moved his arm away. He looked at me, really looked, for the first time. You raised her from birth? Yes. By yourself? Yes. He turned back to Renata, his jaw set, and the warmth was entirely gone from his face, replaced by something cold and exact. He did not say another word to her. He straightened his jacket, glanced at his watch out of pure habit, and walked across the grass to the lot. I heard a car door, an engine, expensive and quiet, and watched it pull out past the school sign and turn toward the highway.
Renata stood alone in the middle of the lawn in her cream dress with the sunlight catching her hair. And she watched the one man who had made her want to play the part of a mother drive away, because he had just understood that the part was all it had ever been. The roses lay in their box on the grass where my mother had set them down. No one picked them up. In the quiet after the car was gone, something moved in my mother's face. She was looking at Iris, not at Renata, not at me. At Iris, standing there in her cap and gown with the gold tassel against her shoulder, her diploma in her hand. The granddaughter she had handed to me 18 years ago, wrapped in an old christening gown and an ultimatum. My mother's eyes were wet. Her lower lip trembled, just for a moment, 2 or 3 seconds. And in that moment, I saw on my mother's face something I had never once seen there in 43 years. Regret. Real, unguarded regret. She opened her mouth, and I thought, this is it. This is where she says she was wrong. This is where 18 years of silence finally cracks and something true comes through. Adele, she said, and I waited. If you hadn't turned that child against her own mother, none of this would have happened. And just like that, the moment closed. The wet in her eyes dried. The trembling lip pressed itself flat. The regret, if it had ever been regret, folded itself back into the fortress of being right that my mother had lived inside since before I was born. My father stood behind her, looking at the grass, and he did not say one word, because he never had. Iris looked at my mother, and her expression was not angry, and it was not contemptuous. It was patient. The look you give someone you have finally accepted will never hear you, no matter how plainly you speak. Grandma, she said, nobody turned me against anyone. I'm 18. I have eyes and ears and 18 years of memories. Do you know how many of those memories have you in them? A few Thanksgivings, 2 Christmases, 1 birthday card when I was 6. She paused. Do you know how many have my mom in them? She turned her hand toward me. All of them. Every single one. Because she was there. My mother had nothing to say to that. There was nothing to say. Iris turned to Renata, 3 feet away, her arms wrapped around herself, her makeup smudged. I'm not trying to hurt you, she said. I need you to hear that. I'm not angry, and I'm not punishing you. But I need you to understand something. She took a step closer. If you want to be in my life, you can be. I'd actually like that. But you have to start from right now. Not from a box of roses, not from a speech, not from a post on the internet calling me your daughter when you don't know my favorite subject or my best friend's name, or that I've been allergic to shellfish since I was 5, which my mom figured out when I broke out in hives at a birthday party and she drove me to the emergency room going 20 over the limit and sat in that waiting room for 3 hours holding my hand. Renata blinked. You're allergic to shellfish? And then Iris reached into the inside pocket of her gown and drew out something small and pale and folded, and held it up for a moment in the afternoon light. The christening gown. The one from my mother's closet, the one that had wrapped me as a newborn and wrapped Iris the night I carried her home.
the one that had lived in a fireproof box on the floor of my closet for almost a decade. She unfolded it, thin as a held breath, frayed at every edge. And then she crossed the grass to me and took my hand and laid it across my palm. "This is yours, Mom," she said. "It was always yours." I held it. It weighed nothing, and it weighed everything. And it smelled faintly of cedar, and of 100 bath nights, and of 18 years of being someone's entire world. I could not speak. There was nothing left to say. My daughter had said all of it. Dana put an arm around my shoulders. The parents nearby had gone quiet. Even the kids still packing up the orchestra's stands had stopped to watch. What happened after that happened in fragments. Renata standing alone on the lawn, her arms crossed, looking at the ground, her cream dress moving in the breeze. No one going to her, no one saying her name. My mother taking my father by the elbow and steering him toward the parking lot without a word. My father following the way he had always followed, neither of them looking back. The box of roses lying in the grass near the maple, the card facing the sky, the proudest day of someone's life, addressed to a daughter who had just, gently and completely, declined the title on behalf of someone else. And my daughter's hand still in mine, and the old gown between our palms, and 18 years, finally, fully, mine to keep. Iris and I walked to my car together, the long way, around the edge of the lawn, past the families and the cameras and the graduates throwing their caps. She did not look back at Renata, and she did not look back at the roses. At the car, she stopped and looked at me with those serious, dark eyes that had known too much too early, and she said, "Are you okay, Mom?" And I told her the truth, which was that I had never in my life been better. We drove home with the windows down. That evening, it was just the two of us, the way it had been on 1,000 evenings. And I made the soup she'd liked since she was small, and we ate it at the kitchen table where she'd asked me, 10 years before, for permission to call me Mom. And afterward, I put the christening gown back in the fireproof box, on top of the guardianship papers, where it belonged, where it had always belonged. Renata texted me, once, 3 weeks later. Not an apology, not quite. She wrote that she hadn't understood, all these years, what she'd actually walked away from, and that watching Iris on that stage had shown her, in 5 minutes, the whole of what she'd missed. And that she didn't expect anything from me, but she wanted me to know that she knew now. I read it twice. I did not respond right away. I have not decided yet what to say, or whether the answer is mine to give or my daughter's. Iris read it too, when I showed her, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "She can start from now." That's all I ever said. The door's not closed. I just get to decide when it opens. She is wiser than I was at her age. She is wiser than I am now. My mother has not called since the lawn. My father mailed a card at Christmas, the first in 18 years, with nothing written inside but his name, the way he'd once mailed a $40 check, and I understood it for what it was. The only language he had ever learned, which was the language of being present in the room and absent from everything that mattered. I have not yet decided what to do with the card either. I have time. For the first time in 18 years, I have time. If you have listened all the way to the end of this, I want to leave you with the thing I have come to believe, sitting at that kitchen table at night with a frayed christening gown in my hands. Biology hands you a child. It is an event, and events are loud, and the world is always ready to celebrate them. But Raising a child is not an event.
It is 10,000 small, unwitnessed mornings.
It is the bottle at 3 a.m. and the fever at midnight, and the science fair poster glued together at the kitchen counter, and the 1,000 bedtimes when you are far too tired to read another page, and you read it anyway. Nobody applauds those mornings. There is no cake for them, no card, no framed photograph over the mantel. They are quiet, the way the truest things are usually quiet. And the world, and sometimes even your own family, will mistake the loud thing for the real one, will mistake the woman with the roses for the woman who stayed. Right up until the moment someone who actually lived it stands up and says, plainly, into a microphone, who the real one was. The loud claim and the quiet truth can stand in the same room for 18 years, but you put them side by side, in front of people, and ask a child who actually raised them. And the truth is the only thing left standing when the noise dies down.
If you are the one in your family who does the work that no one thanks, who holds it all together while someone else gets the applause in the framed photograph, I want you to hear me. You do not need them to call you what you are. You already are it. The title was never theirs to grant or to withhold. It belonged, the whole time, to the one who showed up every ordinary morning and chose the child again. My sister gave birth to my daughter. I became her mother. Those are not the same thing, and after 18 years, in front of 400 people, a remarkable young woman stood up and made the difference plain. Not as revenge, not as a stunt, but simply as the truth, said out loud by the only person in that room who had the standing to say it. My name is Adele Marchetti. I am 43 years old. I am a nurse and a hospital director, and the friend of a woman who cheered for me like a whole section when no one else would. But before any of that, and after all of it, I am the woman who answered the phone at 1 a.m. and drove home through the fog and took the baby and stayed. There is a christening gown in a fireproof box on the floor of my closet, soft as memory, frayed at every edge. It wrapped me once when I was new, before I was anyone. It wrapped my daughter the night I carried her home and made her mine. And 18 years later, on a lawn full of people, she put it back into my hands and told me it had always been mine. She was right. It always was. And so was she.